Okay, welcome everybody. Welcome to the second VegFund activist training session. My name is Leah Gage, and I work with VegFund to help coordinate events and outreach efforts for the organization. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. If not, there's a chat function below at the bottom of the dashboard where you should be able to send me a message. I'm listed as Leah Gage, and let me know if you're having any issues. But real quick, I just want to give a quick introduction. Leslie Barkas, VegFund's executive director, is here as well, but she's overcoming a cough and asked me to do the talking today, so just wanted to give her a shout out. This is our second installment of activist trainings offered for vegan activists. Everybody can see our first training that we offered on storytelling at our VegFund activist resource page. If you go to the website below here, that'll give you access to that. That's online. For those of you who are new to VegFund, we're a nonprofit organization that provides grants to vegan activists around the world to support their outreach efforts. So we fund events like VegFest, film screenings, we fund vegan food sampling, pay-per-view activities, online activism, and lots of other kinds of projects that inspire people to choose and maintain a vegan lifestyle. So you can go to vegfund.org to learn more about how you can apply for a grant or other ways you can get involved. I am going to let's see. I'm going to turn presenting over to Luke. Luke, have you received that?
Yes, I've received that. Hold on momentarily. I'll share my screen.
Awesome. Okay, so just a few logistics. We'll be holding questions until the end of the presentation, but feel free to type any questions as you have them into the questions function on the dashboard. You can also raise your hand in the dashboard, and I can unmute you if you prefer to ask your question using the audio function. I'm going to introduce briefly today's presenters, Kyle Buetzow and Luke Dringoli from Media Cause. Media Cause partners with organizations like VegFund to support online marketing and communications for social good. They've worked with us on website development, outreach efforts, and as of today, they're sharing their expertise with our activists through this webinar. So Kyle and Luke are both committed vegans, passionate about normalizing a plant-based diet. And without further ado, I will turn it over to Luke. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much, Leah. Really, really appreciate it. Hey, everyone, I'm Luke Dringoli. So I'm really, really happy to be with you here today. As Leah said, you know, I'm with Media Cause. I'm a senior account manager, and I really spend my days working with nonprofits and with social good companies out of our Boston office to really drive impact online. So through our work with VegFund and other nonprofits, we've learned quite a bit about online campaigning and especially behavior change. So we're excited to join you today to share some of our expertise.
Great.
Kyle?
And yeah, my name is Kyle Buetzow. I'm an account director in our San Francisco office at Media Cause. My background is in advocacy online campaigning as well as behavior change campaigning, and I'm excited to speak with you as well today.
Yeah, so as Leah mentioned, you know, Media Cause is a digital marketing and communications agency, and really we exist to accelerate the growth and impact of organizations and individuals doing good around the world. So this means that we're specifically focused on the nonprofit space, and you know, we won't talk too much about ourselves, but wanted to just share this as a way of introducing who we are and the sort of work we do. And so today, just to give a quick agenda here, you know, an overview of 5 different things we're going to be doing. Really what we want to do is show you how to build the basic foundation for a successful behavior change campaign. And that's everything from basic planning to measurement and messaging, 2 really crucial aspects for you to consider at the outset of your campaign. And we're also going to introduce you to a key concept that we like to call the community-centric marketing funnel. And then lastly, we're going to open it up for your questions. So as Leah mentioned, you can raise your hand, or you can use the chat and the questions function in GoToWebinar to add a question, and we'll get around to those at the end of the presentation. So Kyle's going to jump in here and talk about our first section. So take it away, Kyle.
Great, thanks, Luke. So as all online activists, really what we're trying to do is create behavior change of some kind. And as Leah mentioned, we are doing this webinar in partnership with VegFund, and so a lot of the examples that we'll be using today are about animal rights as well as vegan activists. However, the actual concepts that we'll be discussing can be applied to any issue-based campaign. So going into the first section of our webinar, we're going to talk about how to actually plan your behavior change campaign. So there are four foundational elements that I wanted to present today. The first being theory of change. Then we'll talk about building a critical path. We'll talk about the difference between strategy and tactics. And then we're going into how to actually select a target audience. Who are we actually trying to reach with our messaging and actually make the change that we want to see? So before I go on, I'm going to just quickly differentiate between a behavior change campaign and an advocacy campaign. So for a behavior change campaign, what we're trying to do is influence an individual's personal choices. That's different than an advocacy campaign, where we're really trying to organize people to use their collective power to create social change. So if you're familiar with advocacy campaigning, some of these concepts are going to be similar, but how we apply them are going to be slightly different. So moving on to the theory of change. So when I say theory of change, the first question that we ask is, how can we create a series of educated if-then assumptions that we have actually created a basis for the change that we want to see? So when I say educated if-then assumptions, this is really going into the difference between advocacy campaigning and behavior change campaigning. With behavior change, it's impossible to know exactly what is going to change somebody's behavior. So, but you always want to create a foundational element to make sure that we are creating a series of informed assumptions that tie together the change we want to see. So when you create a behavior change campaign, we create these if-then assumptions, and it's really easier to understand this concept through examples. So a macro level example of a campaign theory of change, if we apply it to factory farming, we essentially can say, if more people knew about the reality of factory farming, then they would stop eating meat. If you wanted to actually change factory farming practices, this is the foundational element that is going to tie together your entire campaign. However, theory of change also needs to run all the way down through every single step in your campaign. So we call these the micro level theory of change steps. So I'm going to go through a quick example based on that factory farming macro example that I gave before. So let's say if a person watches an undercover video about factory farming, then they will learn about animal cruelty. If a person learns about animal cruelty, then they will consider not eating meat. If a person who considers not eating meat gets a vegan meal plan resource, then they will try veganism. And if a person trying veganism is invited into a supportive vegan community, then they will likely stay vegan. So as you can see, these are a series of assumptions, but they all tie together, and that's an essential element when we're actually creating a campaign. So let's look at an example of one of VegFund's campaigns. So this is a group called Strongest Hearts. It's an organization that creates videos that highlight elite vegan athletes. So the central theory of change for Strongest Hearts is if we portray vegan bodybuilders and athletes in a positive light, then it will break down stereotypes of vegans as being sickly and weak and malnourished. As I mentioned before, that foundational theory of change breaks down into micro-level theory of changes that run all the way through the campaign. So let's give a quick example. If a sports-minded person watches a video about a successful vegan athlete, then they will begin to admire that athlete and their way of life. If they begin to admire that vegan athlete and their way of life, they will consider taking up the same diet and way of life. So this is a quick example of how theory of change really needs to tie together the foundational strategy of your campaign from the very beginning. So let's move into what we call a critical path. So it can be quite overwhelming when building a behavior change campaign and figuring out, well, where should I start? There's this huge change that I want to create in the world and in the individuals that I'm reaching through my campaign, but where do I start? And so the easiest way that we've found to actually figure out that starting point is to actually work your way backwards from your goal. So let's look at a quick example. So if we say that our goal is to, and this is a lofty goal, this is the overall goal that you want to achieve in the world, whether it's poverty reduction or ending human trafficking or eliminating greenhouse gases. This is the overall change that you want to see in the world. So let's say that our goal was we want to transition the world to a plant-based diet. Well, let's work our way backwards from that goal to find a feasible and realistic starting point to actually build a campaign. So starting from that goal, if we work our way backwards, let's think about what needs to happen before we get to that goal that would actually create a feasible stepping stone right before we got to a fully plant-based world. So if we say, for the world to go vegan, people must have empathy for all animals. So we know that we need to create empathy for animals and people. So let's take another step backwards and say, to build empathy for all animals, people must think of farm animals like they think of household pets. And I say pets in quotations because some vegan activists prefer to call them companion animals. For the sake of clarity, I'll be calling them household pets for this presentation. If we take a step backwards from there and we say, for people to think of farm animals as pets, they need to meet farm animals to actually see that they engage with the world in a similar way as pets. And so this series of critical path steps can lead us back to a campaign that say, well, in order to take that first step in that series of steps to get to a plant-based world, we know that we need to create empathy for pets. We know that in order to create empathy for pets, people need to be exposed to farm animals in a different environment than on the shelves of the grocery store. So let's create a campaign that makes it compelling and easy for people to visit a farm animal sanctuary. So as you can see, by working our way backwards from that lofty goal, it actually helped us get to that feasible starting point to actually build a campaign around. All right, so moving on to, this is what we call a campaign's strategy and tactics. So this might sound semantic, but it's actually quite important when thinking about how we're building our campaign. When we say a campaign strategy, we're really talking about what you're trying to do. And when we talk about a tactic, we're actually talking about how you're trying to achieve that strategy. So let's give an example. So an example of a campaign strategy is if we compare farm animals to companion animals, like dogs and cats. We want to compare them to farm animals to create empathy with their human caregivers or owners. The tactic for how we're actually going to do that strategy is we're going to produce a split-screen video of farm animals and companion animals or pets showing emotion in similar ways. So this tactic is actually producing a campaign video, split screen, where we're showing farm animals on one side, companion animals on the right, and we're portraying them in a similar light. This tactic is tied into our overall strategy of comparing farm animals to companion animals. So the reason that this is super important to think about is that strategies are very difficult to pivot. Once you set a strategy, you're essentially, if you want to change that, you're essentially creating a brand new campaign. However, tactics can be constantly tested and optimized. If you're testing the effectiveness of that split screen video tactic and you find that it's not working effectively, you simply try a different tactic. It's still tied into the same strategy. So this is a really important way of framing the building blocks of your campaign to make sure that you're utilizing your resources in the most effective way possible. So let's go to a quick example of a VegFund campaign. So here's the Humane League, a very big player in the animal rights space. So the Humane League currently has a campaign running that's called "What Cody Saw Will Change Your Life." So the Humane League's strategy, and you can watch this video, but the strategy is essentially to shed light on the horrors of factory farming in a way that makes the viewer want to take immediate action. Now, the actual tactic that they're actually using for this campaign is they've created an online video about what Cody saw in a way that also creates hope and tangible next steps that people can take. And it's embedded on a focused landing page with an attention-grabbing ad that is driving traffic to this video with an immediate pledge that people can take to stop eating meat. Now, this might seem like a superficial ask, but what you're essentially doing is you're having an emotional impact through your video tactic on this campaign. And then you're providing an immediate tactical next step that people can take that are taking a commitment to themselves to actually try vegetarian. Now, that tactic might seem like low-hanging fruit for the actual viewer or future supporter of this campaign, but for the Humane League, what you're doing is you're actually creating the opportunity to build a deeper relationship with the person consuming that campaign through the capture of an email. So by that person actually taking a pledge in exchange for their email address, what that gives an opportunity for is for the Humane League to set up automated emails, an automated welcome series that can actually welcome the person into the community, provide resources like diet guides, other resources to help them actually achieve the pledge of going vegan or vegetarian that they took on the site. So that's an example of how strategy and tactics come into play for an online campaign. So let's think about who is the target of the campaign. So who are we actually trying to reach with the campaign? So in the campaign design process, the target of the campaign may come first. It may come after you've created the campaign angle, but as much as possible, you want to make sure that the target of the campaign is a central component of how you're thinking about the design of your video assets, the messaging, the campaign layout. Different people react to different pieces of information and they consume information in different ways, so we want to hone in on that target audience. So when we talk about target audience, there's really two types of campaign target audiences. There's what we call the primary target. The primary target has the power to make the change you want to see. So for a behavior change campaign, that's the individual. The individual is the only person who can make the actual change of accepting and adopting a vegan or plant-based diet. What we call a secondary target, which is a very foundational element of advocacy campaigns, but it also plays into behavior change campaigns. A secondary target is somebody or an institution who has influence over the primary target. So a quick example of a primary target. A primary target for one of these campaigns could be a non-vegan dog lover who eats meat. If you were creating that campaign around, connecting household pets to household animals, a non-vegan dog lover who eats meat would be your primary target. You're not trying to reach vegans; they've already created the change. You're not trying to reach people who don't like pets. This campaign and all of the messaging is built around household pets, and that's your primary target audience. Now, a possible secondary target, and this may or may not be feasible for your particular campaign. One example could be trying to get vegan veterinarians to put posters in their offices that relate farm animal behavior, intelligence, and capacity for emotion to cats and dogs. So if you can actually reach veterinarians who are seeing these people who have household pets every day, they might be able to make very inclusive, optimistic, and hopeful messages that can give people the opportunity to try a plant-based diet. So those are the 4 core areas of building a behavior change campaign that I wanted to discuss. And now I'm going to turn it over to Luke to talk a bit about how we actually measure campaign success. Over to you, Luke.
Thank you, Kyle. So yeah, next we really wanted to talk to you about how you can go about setting up your online behavior change campaign with the right metrics from the start. And so this may seem like you're getting ahead of yourself, but it's actually really important to pick the right data points right off of the bat and to implement the right tracking right off the bat in order to make sure that you're using all your resources and your limited budget that you may have in the best way possible. So first thing on my list that I wanted to talk about are tracking pixels. So these are an absolute must-have for you, especially if you're using a platform like Facebook to advertise. And it's really because, a tracking pixel will allow you to more effectively reach people every single day. It allows you to take people who are already familiar with your campaign because they've visited your website and reach them again using advertising or other techniques instead of starting from scratch every single time. So with Facebook, they provide what is essentially a line of code that you can very easily add to your website and your landing page that you use for your campaign, and it starts tracking for you. So one example would be, if you're running a campaign similar to what Kyle mentioned about vegan advocacy using companion animals. If you were to set up a landing page with a very straightforward ask along with a video, you could add a Facebook tracking pixel as well as other tracking pixels to this landing page, as well as the thank you page that people are redirected to after they submit their email address. And this would allow you to establish audiences on Facebook to then target with your advertising so you can follow up with somebody. So if there's somebody who landed on your web page and they didn't take the action, you could specifically retarget them with your advertising to maybe encourage them to take the action or to try another approach. Meanwhile, for the people who you've now tracked using this code who have taken the action, it's a way for you to continue the dialogue. Maybe you're going to serve them another piece of content, or maybe you're going to ask them to take another action. It's just a very powerful tool that you have at your disposal to make each portion of your campaign work a little bit harder. And you also see on this page there's an icon for Google Analytics. Meanwhile, on Google Analytics, you can use event tags to set up your landing page so that you have much deeper insights in Google Analytics for what people are doing once you get to your website. So you'll see on the slide there are a number of resources that you can interact with once you've received the deck and use as resources moving forward. And so where this leads us to is really the idea of measurement, and especially measurement online and using digital ads. Adding something like Facebook's pixel to your landing page means that not only can you remarket those people later with your ads, but what that does is it allows you to track which of your ads are actually leading to the most amount of conversions. So when we say conversions, we mean email signups, pledges taken, campaign asks completed, things of that nature. And so you can very easily see then, once you have things set up in the right way, which of your ads aren't just leading to clicks or engagement, but are leading to real valuable actions that are happening that will eventually lead to behavior change. And so, we've talked a little bit about campaign videos as well. And so, if you think about a campaign video, you may be creating one or you may already have one. It's important to think about how views are measured both on Facebook and on YouTube, the two biggest video platforms online right now. And so, you may see, in a video as you're scrolling through your news feed, that large number of views in the bottom right-hand corner of every video. It's important to understand that that view count is somewhat foggy or somewhat misleading in a way if you look at that alone. Each Facebook video view is only 3 seconds or more. So it's very important to think about success for your campaign video in terms of not just 3 or 4 or 5 second views, but higher quality views and views that perhaps last half of the video or even more, or complete views. And so the other thing I wanted to point out here is that while Facebook measures a view as 3 seconds or more, YouTube measures a video view as 30 seconds or more. So it's also important, if you're running a video on both Facebook and YouTube, that you're comparing apples to apples. And one thing I want to mention here, just some food for thought. There was a study done in 2015 by Visible Measures that said that 33% of all Facebook video viewers drop off after 30 seconds, and 45% of video viewers drop off after a minute, and then a full 60% of video viewers on average drop off after 2 minutes. So if you think about a sort of standard campaign video that may last 2 to 3 minutes, it's important to think about, as you're storyboarding out and planning your video, what really is essential and what can be boiled down, and what you may want to introduce earlier on in the video so that people who view only a portion of your video are still getting exposed to your message and not just an introduction. And so moving on from this, I really just want to emphasize here that as you're getting started, or maybe you're already started with your online campaign, it's so important to utilize all of the free analytics tools that are already out there. So on Facebook or on YouTube, you have 2 very powerful analytics and insights dashboards that are available to you right now. And it's important to use those, for instance, when you're thinking about video, to dive in a little bit deeper. So if you think about what you have actually available for you on Facebook, in this screen grab here, you can see that this is a way you can dive in and look at audience retention throughout the life of a video. You can see average percent watched, and you can see where dips happen. You can see the percentage of people who auto-played or people who click to play. You can also see things like people who play the video muted versus with sounds. It's very important to think about how these play into your video, and also to very fairly look at your success based on what the sort of quality was of the engagement and the views with your video. And so some metrics to make mention of here are just, as you look in your dashboard, especially on Facebook, look at video average watch time, look at average percentage of video viewed, and then look at cost per 10-second video view and cost per 30-second video view. These are ways that you can get a little bit more deeper and sort of judge what is performing best and a way to revise based on that. And then so next, to go a little bit deeper, from a measurement perspective, I mean, really the key question that you should ask yourself throughout your entire campaign, starting at the start, is, did people actually change their behavior as a result of your campaign? And so earlier, Kyle talked about setting up your theory of change, mapping out your critical path. Your campaign really will inevitably be built on assumptions, and that's okay. Really, the good news is that you can and should test these assumptions, both early and often. So what it translates to is that at a bare minimum, something you should bake into your campaign is a regular series of surveys and/or interviews that use the same set of questions to measure the effectiveness of your campaign at changing behavior. And the data won't lie. You'll have it, and you'll be able to adjust as often as you're able to do these surveys. We recommend a regular loop where you're using this on, say, a monthly or a quarterly or, at the bare minimum, a yearly sort of large-scale survey. And it's really important. And this is why, earlier on we also sort of try to stress the importance of capturing somebody's information, because if you say reach them once with an ad and that's that, you don't have the ability to not only form a deeper relationship, but actually test whether their behavior was changed over time. So, that survey, as you develop it, and the interview process, if you go about it, it should answer a number of key questions. Really, at the base, it should answer, did you change your behavior? Speaking to the supporter and the engaged person who's taking part in your campaign. Did they change their behavior? How long did they change it for? And also, what caused them to change their behavior? What about the video or the message or whatever content that you serve them, what about it got them to make that change, and what inspired them? And what can you learn from that? And then also, have they kept this behavior change? And if not, what led them to revert? And so finally, when we think about measurement, the last thing that I want to speak about here is this idea of working towards a true cost per good done. And this is a key number that we think you should keep in mind. That is something that is worth thinking about when you're still in the planning stages, or if you're involved in a campaign. It's something that it should be worked towards and established and then improved over time, month over month, year over year. It's this idea of, as you can see on the slide, coming to one single number based on dividing the amount of money you spend on a campaign. And that could be the amount of money you spend on ads or campaign resources, and dividing that by the amount of impact that you have created for every single person who has changed their behavior. So if we think about an example here, we could think about, to go along with the same theme, an animal rights activist who is encouraging more people to go vegan. They would divide the amount of money they spent on Facebook ads. Say they spent $5,000 in a month on Facebook ads. They would divide that and any other, including any other expenses, by the amount of animal lives that are saved by the number of people who took their pledge, say, in a given month. And this is a number that needs to be looked at, needs to very plainly and fairly be judged based on the best research that is out there. And it needs to be refined over time, and it needs to be country specific. But it's something that if you're able to establish over time, it gives you a clear barometer of where you're at. And it gives you something to work down over time. If you can be more efficient with your ad spend, or whatever else you do as part of your online campaign, there is a direct result in the amount of behavior you have changed over time. And so next up, we want to talk a little bit about messaging and give you guys some pointers that you can use moving forward. So for that, I'll kick it back over to Kyle.
Great, thanks, Luke. So we wanted to discuss messaging pointers to keep your campaign on point. So of course, when we talk about messaging, what is messaging, right? Well, messaging can be everything from the script in your campaign video. It can be the tone in the color palette on your campaign video. It can be the copy on your campaign website. All of these elements are formed on a messaging perspective. And so how do we build a messaging perspective that sticks, that people find memorable and compelling? So the first aspect that I wanted to talk about is keep it simple. When we are talking about issue-based campaigns, like some of the biggest problems that exist in the world today, there's so many elements to them that they can often get complex and complicated, but we have to understand that we have a very small sliver of time getting our message in front of people who may actually consider a behavior change. So how can we boil down all of the elements of this complex issue into copy, into messaging that is simple to understand at its very basic element? So one way to test this is to test it on yourself, actually. So here's a process that you can go through to see whether you've successfully kept your message simple. So watch your campaign video once it's produced, or read your core messaging and wait for 5 minutes. Now put that computer away, put your messaging away, wait 5 minutes, and write down everything that you remember. So if you, the person who actually created this campaign messaging, if you're having trouble remembering all of the elements of what you said, if this is difficult for you, I guarantee it will be impossible for your audience. What you will probably find is all the details that you thought originally were really important and vital to include in your messaging. Those are the first things that fall away when you actually think about, what did I actually remember? What you remembered is going to be that core element. And so as much as we can tie messaging to that core element and keep it simple, the more it's going to be memorable and compelling for your target audience. So next, one of the most important aspects of a behavior change campaign is creating a sense of urgency. People don't make a change if they feel like they can wait. Let's think about how we act in our everyday lives. We all struggle with motivation. Why should I take my car in for a checkup when it's working just fine? You know, you wait until the light goes off on your dashboard. You wait until there's some strange sound in your car before you finally go in to inevitably pay money that you didn't plan on to get your car fixed. And so we put things off. Why should I write this report when it's not due for another week? You know, we procrastinate. We go on YouTube. We search the internet, Facebook. So how can we create urgency to get people to take a tangible step as immediately as possible? And one of the ways we do that is by really focusing on creating urgency. So I'm going to read 2 statements, and this isn't a back and forth conversation, or else I would ask for a show of hands, but essentially think about which statement is more likely to motivate action. So statement A: if trends continue, agricultural emissions will take up the entire world's carbon budget by 2050. Or B: you can save 400 gallons of water by not eating meat today. If you are like me, number B is much more simple, and it creates much more urgency by talking about what you can achieve right away by making a change. So that's really what we're thinking about when we're talking about creating urgency. So going on to the next, less is more. When we're creating website captions, headlines, landing page copy, less is more. People have such a limited time to see your message that this is again getting down to boiling down your message to the most essential elements. Use words sparingly and very precisely. Think about every single word that you're using to tease and intrigue the reader or the viewer. So this is just another one of those statistics that is out there, which is probably even less now. The average human attention span in 2013 is 8 seconds. As you can imagine, social media is changing the way that we consume content, the way that we can pay attention to a particular message. So I'm guessing that that's even lower in the last 4 years. One study found that Facebook posts with 40 or fewer characters receive 86% higher engagement than other longer posts. So these are just a few different statistics that really point to that same concept of less is more. So moving on to one way to test the effectiveness of or the compelling nature of your campaign. So we call it the cubicle test. So most of us, work surrounded by people, or if you work in co-working space, you might have some friends or fellow colleagues in the general area. If you think that you have an EGADS moment for your behavior change campaigns, here's a quick process that you can go through. Focus on building a 10 to 30 second elevator pitch to explain your messaging idea. Work on this by yourself. Now, walk up without letting them know that you're coming over. Walk up to a friend or colleague and say, what do you think about this idea for a campaign? Give your elevator pitch. Now ask them for completely honest feedback. If they're excited, you may be onto something. If they're very easily excited by lots of ideas, try it on another friend. Do this a couple of times. We are very, very biased towards our own ideas, and we're all guilty of it. And so instead of staying inside your own head, because a behavior change campaign is trying to change other people's behaviors, we really need to take the time to do some quick knee-jerk reactions to, is this a good idea or not? Let's move on to the next. And this plays into the same concept. So this example is, as we talked about, we're talking about vegan activists for the examples of this campaign. But it really applies to anybody outside of your issue area. So if you work in a nonprofit, you probably know that we can become an echo chamber for ideas. Messaging that sounds good to us in this nonprofit echo chamber don't actually resonate with the general public. They're not thinking about these issues every single day. And so we need to test our ideas on people outside of our immediate cohort to figure out whether these ideas and messaging are actually having the intended effect that we wanted them to see. So here's a quick example of, this is a message that I took from a vegan campaign, and it's a tweet, or sorry, it's a Facebook post that says, the grammar is a little bit off, but they essentially say, should we be going paleo or be part-time vegans? Is that what you're asking us to do? If you know about the paleo diet, it's very meat heavy, it's very dairy heavy. This is obviously not the intended effect of the campaign message from the campaigner. And so this is just a quick example of how we can use social media, You can use your non-vegan or non-issue friends to test your ideas and figure out whether something is actually landing and having the desired effect. If you're at a party with friends who work together and they're all talking about people that they know using industry jargon, and you're sitting there rolling your eyes, you probably know what it's like to be preaching to the choir. And we are not trying to preach to the choir with behavior change campaigns. We're trying to reach people to make a change that we want to see. So moving on to the next is don't stretch the truth. There are so many awesome reasons to become more progressive on an issue, the issues that we all work on every day. You don't want to undermine your message by stretching the truth or making unfounded claims. If your facts aren't supported by science or a credible source, don't risk using it in your campaign. Find the facts and the elements of the campaign that are credible and base it on them, because you don't want people to refute your messaging based on something that you never really even needed to use in the beginning. And finally, this is the second to last messaging strategy, is to make a heart connection. So it's so easy to fall into numbers and statistics and try and convince people through our rational brains to make a change. 76% of Americans think this. 1 in 960,000 people have a chance of this happening. The problem is that study after study shows that people don't make decisions entirely based on information. Emotions have a much bigger impact than facts. So if you have read Chip and Dan Heath's book, Switch, How to Change Things that When Change is Hard, it's a great book. I highly recommend it. They use the elephant and the elephant rider as a core metaphor for explaining this heart connection. So in this example, if you think of the elephant rider is this small, comparatively weak person sitting on top of an elephant. They know exactly where they want to go, and they know the speed that they want to go there. This is the left side of your brain. It's the rational side of the brain. Now, the elephant in this example is emotion. It's a metaphor for emotion, people's emotional reaction to something, or the right side of somebody's brain. If the elephant doesn't feel compelled to move, if people's emotions aren't stirred, the elephant rider is stuck. There's no amount of kicking or whipping that can make an elephant move. The elephant rider is just too weak in comparison. So this is a long way of saying, don't focus solely on rational, fact-based arguments for why people should create the change. Find the emotional elements that make a heart connection with people, and use those as the foundation of your campaign. Now, going into the last slide that ties into the heart connection is stories. We've all heard the quote, "The death of one man is a tragedy. The death of millions is a statistic." Never is this more telling than in issue-based campaigning. Every single issue, there seems to be some Armageddon coming if we don't change our behavior. However, that Armageddon is often pushed down off into the future, and it's often not based in real personal experiences, and it can feel very inaccessible. So as much as you can, build your campaign around stories that people can relate to. Whether it's the story of one person, the story of a group of people that people can relate to, whether it's the story of an animal, the story of something. This makes your campaign much more accessible and it will be much more effective in the end. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Luke to talk about how all of these things that we're talking about get wrapped up in what MediaCause calls our community-centric marketing funnel.
Thanks, Kyle. So yeah, before we get to questions, we really want to introduce this concept, this community-centric marketing funnel. And so we want you to think of this as a framework for you to consider for your campaign. It's really a natural progression for each person that you hope to expose to your message. If you think about it as a concept, it's a way to guide your supporters and your potential supporters through a series of small to bigger asks. And as your audience of supporters moves deeper through each of these stages that you see here in this funnel shape, the relationship should really get stronger and deeper. And as we talk about here, as the world gets noisier and noisier, and as our attention spans get smaller and smaller, we really feel passionately that this is the best possible approach to growing a community of supporters who will drive your behavior change goals. And I know you can see each of these stages here, but we want to go into a little bit more depth for you. So as we look closer at each stage of the funnel, whether it's known or not, every campaign, including yours, has one of these funnels. It's just up to you to define and fully develop your funnel. That first phase, which is at the top, the yellow phase, which is also the largest phase of possible supporters, is the awareness phase. And this is really the entry point, and it includes someone who might have seen a Facebook ad, someone who might have seen a headline for a blog post, might have clicked on it, has some general overall idea that you exist. They're not very deep, they don't know everything, they certainly haven't consumed a lot of content related to your campaign, but they're just generally aware that a campaign like this does exist. And as they move a little further down the funnel, they get into the consideration stage. And this is when that same person who's aware of your campaign takes the next step. It's when they watch your video, it's when they visit your website landing page and start to really consider the ideas that you're expressing to them, the crux of your campaign, what you want them to change. They're starting to really get a sense of that and think about what it means to them. And then once they've done that, they move into the conversion phase when they raise their hand. When they raise their hand and they say, yes, I will take this tangible action related to your campaign. And if we go back to the example Kyle showed of the Humane League, it's that idea of the sign-up box where you give your email and you make that very basic pledge, which you might think doesn't mean all that much, but it's this small yes sort of action that gets them in the door and involved in a very basic way. This could also include somebody who maybe signs a petition on your behalf to enact, in the examples we're talking about here, somebody who would sign a petition to enact stronger animal protection laws. It could be, something as basic as requesting a starter kit, something of that nature. Really, the key now is that they're actually invested in your campaign. And ideally, for any truly successful online behavior change campaign, they've provided you with information such as their email address that then you can use to follow up and continue the dialogue. And so once they're through this stage, they're on to the loyalty phase. And this is when that same supporter starts to continually engage with your campaign. Maybe they're posting a comment on your Facebook page, maybe they're reading your follow-up emails, but most importantly, what this is good hard evidence of actual behavior change happening. And then once they get down to that very bottom of the funnel, they're in the advocacy phase. And this happens when that supporter starts outwardly and publicly sharing your campaign's message, and they start mentoring other people in their own social network to make the same behavior change that they did. And really at this point, they're no different than you. They're so involved in your campaign that they're an extension of your campaign. And then from there, the circle of life continues. The funnel starts all over again. And so there you have it. This is a concept that we really wanted to introduce you to because we think if you think of your campaign as you're starting out or as you're developing it in terms of these 5 stages, it gives you the best possible framework to develop a fully functional structure here to have a successful ongoing campaign that feeds itself and grows and gets larger and creates more and more impact. And so with that, I think we're ready for some Q&A. So Leah, do you want to help us get that kicked off?
Sure. Thank you guys so much. This was a really good presentation, and I love that it tied into our last training about storytelling and the importance of storytelling to make a compelling campaign. So that's really great. We've had a number of questions. Some of them have been answered, I think, through the presentation. One of the first questions we had comes from Max, and it's kind of a broad question. Is there an age or social group that's especially effective or to influence through online campaigning? He's wondering how he can maximize the impact of online campaigns.
Yeah, I'll jump
Kyle,
into
do you
that.
want to take this one?
I'll jump into that one. Thanks for the question, Max. So when we think about different groups and who is more likely to convert their behavior based on your campaign, that's an excellent question to start with. You don't want to think about that question in the greater context of online campaigning, but rather in the particular campaign. So in the example that we used about a campaign that was trying to convert people who love their dogs and their cats into adopting a plant-based lifestyle, you wouldn't want to gear that campaign towards somebody who hates cats and dogs or who could care less about cats and dogs. You would want to keep that campaign hyper-focused on people who have cats and dogs. And so you can do this in a variety of ways. Through keyword research, through your ads, through SEO optimization of your meta content on your campaign landing page to attract the right types of people based on search terms in Google, based on Facebook targeting like interest-based targeting or location-based targeting. You want to use all of those available resources to hone your particular campaign towards the target audience that makes the most sense for that campaign, rather than a general everybody who's most likely to convert in an online campaign. Try and get as specific to your particular campaign or issue as you can. I hope that answered your question.
Great. We've had a number of questions, people asking whether or not they can see this presentation afterward and other presentations, and the answer to that is yes, definitely. Following this webinar, I'll send out links to everybody, and we'll get this one uploaded to the website as soon as we can. Let's see. Okay, here's a question from Emma. She asks, you talked about behavior change and advocacy, which she says is policy change. How important is public perception change, and is that different in your mind? Can you address that at all, kind of looking at a broader but public change versus individual behavior change?
Yeah. Luke, do you want to take that one, or do you want me to jump into that?
Yeah, sure, I'll take that one. So thanks, Emma, for your question. When you think about public change versus individual behavior change, I think there's room to think of them both sort of in the same breath, but slightly differently. Whereas, with behavior change, I think a lot of the sort of emotional and story-based aspects are very important in order to build empathy with each individual person. But I think a sort of public policy component can be built into any behavior change campaign, where, as part of, like these ongoing follow-ups that we talk about, where you're nurturing a relationship over email or over social. I think one way to weave in public policy is to, for instance, have them get more involved in a certain debate, or educate them about a certain issue, and then provide them with petitions and get them more involved in that way. I think there's certainly room to weave that in with any sort of behavior change campaign, because really you want content to work with that will resonate with this newfound audience. And somebody who's ready and willing to take a behavior change needs inspiration, and I think it can help to sort of get them involved in those sort of issues as a way to make them feel like they are taking even more action beyond that initial pledge, or beyond a specific follow-up about them.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm gonna
add,
add one quick example onto that. So in terms of how public perception is tied to behavior change, so there's been a sweeping and more subtle public perception change in how farm animals are treated. There was a measure in Massachusetts this year that was trying to put stronger protections on farm animal welfare. That there had been evidence through animal rights organizations that public perception had been shifting over the years, and people were starting to think more about how farm animals were treated, even if they weren't going fully towards a vegan diet. And that measure passed, measure 3, I believe, that passed with a 78% approval rating. And so that is a huge success in terms of a policy win, but it was in a follow-up to campaigners realizing that there was a change in perception happening. Of course, this is all tied into behavior change, because those campaigners would use that as an opportunity to try and even extend that public perception and that policy change into individual behavior change, more geared towards a plant-based diet.
Is asking about different ways of effective campaigning. So Eloise asks, would you consider a campaign that demonstrates how easy it is to be vegan as worthwhile as one that focuses on ethical reasons for becoming vegan?
Mm-hmm. Luke, you want to take that?
Well, Leah, would you mind just repeating that question for me? You broke out a little bit there.
Yeah, definitely. So the question is, would you consider a campaign that demonstrates the ease of becoming vegan as worthwhile or as effective as one that focuses on the ethical reasons for becoming vegan? And I guess this depends on kind of what your goal is.
Yeah, exactly. And this is a great question, and I think, again, it speaks to what Kyle mentioned before on the first question, where it does all depend on what your goal is. And I think this is certainly a campaign worth testing. It's this idea really with online campaigning that you should always test and learn, and I think there's certainly room for a campaign that uses this as at least an entry point. We talk about specifically in the animal rights movement and in terms of veganism, there being a number of ways to sort of get your foot in the door or become passionate and involved. And it's not unlike a lot of issues, but in terms of veganism, it's, not only the environmental aspect, but also the ethical aspect and also the nutritional aspect. But it's certainly worth testing. And I think, if you go through the process as we've outlined and think about what makes sense, think about your theory of change, think about your critical path, it's something that can be worked towards and established, but with that caveat that it's most likely an entry point, but it's not a be-all, end-all. It's a way to get somebody considering this lifestyle perhaps as a way of framing it to look easily attainable, but once they're involved, providing them with, say, mentorship or guidance or the resources they need to make it a long-term behavior change.
Okay. I know we've gone a bit over time. Are you guys okay to take one more question?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. So this is a question about specific tactics. Sorry, I'm just going back to the question here. Okay, here's a question about social media. What's the best way to obtain more followers on Instagram and maybe Facebook as well? Are live videos effective? You talked about videos and how long they should be. So I think this is interesting now that we're using so many live video, or that live videos have become a lot more widely used, and I think they can be an effective way to get people involved. But what do you think? Has that been effective? Are there ways to use it that are more effective than others?
Yeah, sure. Kyle, I'll take this one, and you can feel free to chime in with any thoughts you have. I think this is another really great question. Really, when I think about the rise of live social media video, be it Facebook Live or now Instagram Live video, or what Twitter is also doing in terms of live broadcasts, these sort of live and real-time pieces of content, I think, are really good when it comes to engagement and a way to get somebody involved and also excited because it's something that they're receiving in the moment. I don't necessarily think it's a great way to, say, build audience on a platform like Facebook, but I think it's a really nice engagement piece to get somebody talking, to get them viewing, to get them exposed and into that awareness phase of the funnel that we mentioned. But I think it needs to be followed up with messaging, which you can do via retargeting and a well set up Facebook ad campaign to then develop a list using Facebook's custom audiences feature to retarget specifically people who watched live video on your page and serve them a follow-up. Ask them to sign up for emails from your organization, send them to a landing page to watch a follow-up video, and then ask them for a pledge. Use it as an entry point, as a way to get a lot of people into the top of your funnel, but then continue to funnel them down to a phase where you're having a more direct relationship with them.
Yeah, and I'm gonna just add one recommendation into that, is to think about how we're using this webinar right now. There are a few hundred people that are probably listening right now, but what we're going to do is record this. It's being recorded. We're going to republish it online on probably 2 separate websites. We're going to tag it with meta tags to try and drive organic traffic to the actual recording of the webinar, and we're going to get probably an exponential number of people consuming this webinar after the webinar actually finishes. And so we should think about how to create a longer shelf life for our content. And I think that plays into live video as well. Can you do a live video, also record it, and then edit it down into content that you can use at a later time to extend the life of your message, and also to reach audiences that weren't able to tune in or just weren't online at the time that you were doing the live video feed?
I think that's a great way to end this webinar. And hopefully, I know there have been a bunch of other questions that we haven't been able to get to, but hopefully some of them will be answered in reposting this. And also, you'll see here, Kyle and Luke have very kindly given their contact information. And so if you have follow-up questions that you'd like to direct to them, please do so. You can also email me. You've probably received a number of emails from me throughout the planning of this webinar, so you should have that email. It's conferences@vegfund.org. Kyle and Luke, thank you guys so much. This has been super informative, and I think everybody's been really engaged in the presentation.
Oh, thank you.
We had a great time, and we look forward to hopefully doing more webinars together in the future and going even a bit deeper into how to create effective campaigns online.
Awesome. Hopefully, yeah, let's do this again. Thank you all so much for being here, and best of luck with all of your online campaigns. And we'll reconvene and see how everybody's done next time.
Yeah, thanks so much. Have a great day.
Take care, everybody.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.